Throughout the Akatsuki, many rivalries have come about, and many have been talked about, including this one, Itachi versus Obito. However, all those videos seem to gloss over and try to simplify the very relationship between Itachi and Obito and their, dare I say, rivalry, which just isn't something you can do with this fight. So today, I've gathered every piece of information regarding their relationship and powers comparatively to decide who would actually win this fight, and why it's much more complicated than you might think. Almost every video so far on this topic has had a section of wasted time discussing Itachi versus Jubito or Itachi versus White Mask Obito, which are simply topics that nobody actually argues about. So for you guys today, like I did with Itachi versus Pain, I will make probably one of the more in-depth discussions you've seen on this topic specifically, only just on Itachi and Obito during their Akatsuki days, as that's when the rivalry is implied. But before this, we need to go a few years back to really understand just where this rivalry stems out of, to understand more of what Obito seems to be referencing when he makes questionable claims about how insane Itachi really was in terms of his power. Around the age of 12, Itachi has already been deemed so strong that he should actually be Anbu captain, and having Danzo go as far to lie about his age on his papers to grant him status, which is very consistent as Itachi by this point has already stood alongside Shisui as rivals, and even seems to be implied to kind of reach the peak of the Uchiha clan, with Shisui and Fugaku gloating about the size of his new fireball. However, Shisui would die, which would go on to amplify Itachi many times over, granting them the Mangekyo Sharingan, with him being able to actually spar and keep up with Shisui. Previously, the same Shisui who was called the greatest ever at body flicker, all of this actually implying that Itachi, when he does encounter Obito in the Uchiha basement, is already approaching the peak of his clan and village at large. Upon him seeing Obito down there, Itachi engages him for the first time since Obito murdered his teammate Tenma 4 years ago, with Obito noting his growth. Itachi also noticed how Obito has been using Kamui to reave around the certain cameras within the hideout, meaning that Itachi knows of this aspect of Kamui. Then they escape to a path lined by cedar trees under a nearly full moon with the road to Sunegakure in sight. Then Obito mentioned how Itachi is now aware of his hate for Konoha and the Uchiha, the novel now establishing the exact same scene laid out in both the Itachi and Obito retelling from the manga, just adding more pieces of conversation that was initially left out. Then the narrator notes how Itachi wouldn't allow Obito to take revenge, with him also following up with "I have conditions," cutting straight through Obito's attitude. "I'll help you get revenge on the Uchiha clan, and in exchange you don't lay a hand on the village or Sasuke Uchiha." Obito by this point was unable to hide his shock at just how forceful Itachi is, a definition of forcefulness being physical energy or intensity, which is very consistent, as we'll discuss in a minute. Itachi's face devoid of all expressions, he offered the answer to Obito's questioning, stating, "If you refuse this request, you and I are enemies." And Obito just had to ask, "Could you kill me?" And Itachi rebutted with, "It's not a matter of if I can or not. I will kill you." Then the two shinobi acknowledged each other as opponents, with no more bloodlust remaining in their auras, which, while this scene has been analyzed many times in these videos, many things simply aren't examined enough. Them acknowledging each other as, opponents, and there being no more bloodlust remaining in their auras would imply that there previously was bloodlust, which is pretty consistent with how Itachi forcefully cut through Obito's arrogant attitude, forcing him into this more serious state. Now, while some may question these auras and wonder if these are genuinely power related or simply signs of an ideological conflict between them, the answer here should be clear, especially once you sit it next to their original encounter 4 years prior with Tenma, which opens with Itachi being 7 or 8, and Obito approaching his escort squad acting goofy, then immediately shuts this persona down, and shuts down the squad with a genjutsu that wiped the daimyo, his close aides, the two guardian shinobi of the 12 out. Yet Itachi, without his Sharingan and his genjutsu specialist teammate Tenma, actually resisted Obito's genjutsu. Obito then would go on to brutally murder Tenma, which I won't get into all of its gore here and how he did that. That's page 82 of the first novel. But after this, Itachi tried to state his Konoha affiliation, but couldn't continue and was totally suppressed by Obito's wordless pressure. The narrator stating, perhaps his instinct, sensing the difference between his own abilities and those of the man, refused to let him fight, with it also just alluding to how he was trying to process the phenomenon of the man's body. You see where they get linked? Itachi was so much weaker than Obito that he was even overwhelmed by his very pressure, yet when a few years have passed, he's trained quite a bit since then and can now forcefully cut through that pressure and force Obito to acknowledge him as opponent while he did the same, with Itachi just being confident and certainly killing Obito one way or another as he promised. See, while this encounter is short, it still needs a lot of attention to understand more about where Obito gained so much respect for Itachi, and that has now just been presented. This is why Obito states, now that Itachi is dead, the Leaf Village is no longer off limits, referencing his deep unwillingness to break this pact, a pact that if broken guaranteed his death by Itachi's hands, sort of implying that Obito may not even disagree with that possibility. Even the third data book mentions how Obito's goal of Tsukiyomi and Itachi's death might actually be of a similar priority for Obito. And then you have the most nuclear statement for Obito and the one that he makes about Itachi, adding more to why he was so weary of testing Itachi, and this would be him internally monologuing in his head that if Itachi knew everything about me, I'd be dead. This basically confirming that via Obito's own admission, Itachi could kill him if he knew more of his abilities. How Itachi would actually do this, we don't really know. However, you may actually be able to pinpoint this away from Amaterasu if you consider their interaction in the Naruto Road to Ninja movie as canon, which could be possible considering Kishimoto's name is in the credits, and he actually did draw a mini manga leading into it for the Naruto manga box set, I believe 3, showing that he actually might have had some respect to its canonicity, and if you are to accept it, there's a scene where Itachi threatens Obito, saving Sakura, and states, I take it physical attacks will be ineffective against one such as you. However, I have other cards up my sleeve. Obito then responds by stating, if you put your mind to it, you could even set me on fire. This will immediately make you think of Amaterasu due to the fire wording. However, when you consider that Amaterasu did mess Obito up, he still kind of countered it with the fact that the physical attacks won't work and the Amaterasu is stated to be the strongest physical attack. You might actually be able to rule out Amaterasu and potentially even imply Tsukiyomi, as the emphasis here is on his left eye, which houses the strongest genjutsu, which also just wouldn't be physical, which is pretty interesting and may hold some validity with how he could counter Obito's basic genjutsu without a Sharingan, but it's just a possibility. Still, only to be granted if you were to accept this movie as canon. I've heard some people also argue that it couldn't be the Totsuka Blade since Obito could passively phase through Naruto's chakra hand in the war. However, the Totsuka Blade is weightless and without physical form, meaning it also couldn't be chakra, or at least mainly chakra, due to chakra having weight, as noted several times throughout the manga. So the Totsuka Blade could have been what Obito was thinking of if you think he reviewed Zetsu's footage prior to the of the battle prior to this statement and when he actually does talk to Sasuke, which could also just be possible. With that being said, despite the method being unknown, Itachi, while in the Akatsuki, could kill Obito while he was in the Akatsuki. This becomes even more consistent when you consider a few more higher interpretations of their scaling, analyzing their feats and narrative. With that being said, Obito is generally considered the peak of the Akatsuki, which I'll call into question a little bit later, but with him just being of that tier, I believe we should first analyze Itachi to see how he would stack up to the level of the masked man and where he's actually portrayed to be. The level of a man who Itachi dreamed of surpassing in his novel at the age of 7 following the death of Tenma. Beginning with the Sasuke encounter is probably the only right way to go about this, as if Itachi was truly only relative to a pre-MS heavy Sasuke, I fear him standing a chance against Obito is not near as consistent as we've previously portrayed it to be. A portrayal which makes Itachi not being relative to Sasuke very consistent, considering how Itachi and Obito have to be relative, as we mentioned earlier, with Itachi potentially even holding an edge against him. Moreover, during the fated battle between brothers, it's made pretty clear through this fight just how Itachi is holding back and not trying against Sasuke in almost every instance, which, coupled with his illness and his Mangekyo usage over his life finally catching up to him, with his left eye being visibly worse due to the usage of Tsukiyomi a single time, it becomes pretty clear how Zetsu noted that Itachi was moving strangely and was stronger than what he had let on, stating that Itachi should have been able to dodge his attacks, thinking back to the Rig Shuriken, which is pretty consistent with these Rig Shuriken being a counter to Itachi weaving signs that Sasuke could track and react via the Shuriken, despite Itachi perception blitzing him with signs for a clone, while also just countering all of his Shuriken just a few chapters prior, solidifying how Itachi can perception blitz this Sasuke with signs, yet does in one instance and seemingly for no reason doesn't in the next, meaning that Itachi probably just had to slow down his pace, holding back even more, which basically just gets confirmed when the Shuriken go off. As Itachi sees Sasuke pull the strings, he turns his head and then just watches them penetrate his leg. Then, after showing a shot of just how bad Itachi's vision really is, he drops down to one knee due to the gash across it. Sasuke then uses a fireball, which Itachi still weaves and still doesn't get off guard by Sasuke's Chidori charge, showing just how Itachi is superior in this fight compared to Sasuke, despite showing many clear signs of him holding back and being deathly sick and blind by the end of the fight. And yes, I did say blind. When Orochimaru appears in the 8-headed Hydra, Itachi feels the aura and concludes it's probably the Hydra, despite it being gigantic and literally white, and this is due to how his eyes are completely whited out, something many colored manga sites actually miscolor, but the original manga shows his eyes completely whited out, which is due to how his cataracts were so impaired that protein cannot accumulate along the eyelids, giving off this whitened effect that blind people typically have. It would be because of all these reasons that Obito would conclude to Sasuke that if Itachi wanted him dead, he would be, which the Naruto Storm Generations, a game potentially canon to the anime according to CyberConnect 2, stating that Itachi had no worthy opponents, implying that Obito didn't believe himself to be a worthy opponent for Itachi by this point in the series, which still does align with all the narrative presented earlier, but we can just, rule out any scaling now between Itachi and Heavy Sasuke. But with that being said, with that being ruled out, is there any way of determining more about Itachi and Obito? Is there any way to add more consistency? And to many people's surprise, yes. As while Obito is feared as Madara, as, basically the strongest shinobi, Itachi isn't far off and isn't in the Sannin tier fighters like you may think, and is probably just much higher, with Itachi blitzing around and slicing up Orochimaru's 8-headed Hydra that's compared to a dragon god and even surpasses Orochimaru himself, the same Orochimaru who fought equally to Old Man Hiruzen, who is stated to have stood at the pinnacle of the shinobi world, and this gets pretty consistent with how Itachi also beats Orochimaru so bad with a 3-tomoe genjutsu that Orochimaru left the Akatsuki due to how inferior he felt to Itachi, which is elaborated on a little bit more in the Akatsuki novel, and the god rhetoric for the Hydra is also probably pretty consistent with how Itachi's Susanoo is described, that the Susanoo boasts an absolute perfect attack and defense because of its spirit weapons wielded in both hands, the 10-handed sword that can cut down any enemy in its right, and the Yatamir, a shield that can repel any attack. In the face of a god's power, all attacks, whether from a material or astral body, ninjutsu or physical, lose its meaning, end quote. With characters like Pain also just being called a god constantly throughout the third databook, with Obito having 2 separate sections for his own for both Tobi and Madara. This could be what Itachi might actually use to kill Obito, as he believed, as while Obito might use Kamui to get around the Susanoo, as that's stated to be chakra in this third databook file. Getting past the Yatamir would be virtually impossible, and he likely couldn't even Kamui suck it away, and would just get those properties matched and repelled, as implied previously. The Totsuka Blade also just might be the win con for Itachi if you think Kamui would pass through something that, has no physical, or simply just maybe the Kamui just might not even register the Totsuka Blade since it doesn't have any mass or weight, and would simply just register it as nothing or air, which could be possible, but it's a little uncertain. However, I digress. Even with the Itachi's lack of showings whilst alive, we can certainly compare where his peak is at and why it's probably at the beginning of Shippuden, and why it's much different in comparison to his battle with Sasuke, as when he fought Sasuke, he was coughing up blood, something that Zetsu noted wasn't normal for him. I mean, that's not normal for anybody. He was dropping to his knees after a single stab wound. He didn't seem to even attempt many ninjutsu at all and simply relied on MS abilities, and this is polar in comparison to his, to his, to the comparison when he actually battled Kakashi in Team 7 with just 30% of his chakra and no Mangekyo, which gives him more chakra, and he's actually able to use 2 Genjutsu clones, a fireball jutsu, with the anime, just having an even higher interpretation for Itachi's stamina, with him using several more, such as like the Phoenix Flower Jutsu, all of which with him still piecing up Kakashi at the exact same time, which is probably just consistent of how Itachi was able to Perception Blitz Sharingan Kakashi during part 1 with just his 3 Tomoe, something never replicated again, and also this isn't that bad for Kakashi. I mean, Itachi also Perception Blitz Sasuke as well. And with this being said, you'll notice this theme of Itachi in part 1 using basic Genjutsu, Water Bullets, Clone, Tsukiyomi twice, Amaterasu without any sweat or scuff mark, then a few years later using all those jutsu we mentioned against Kakashi with only 30% of his chakra and no Mangekyo. So how the hell does Itachi go from this consistent level of having good stamina and power reserves to then coughing up blood during his battle with Sasuke and having a heart attack in just maybe 3 months? Well, it's likely just due to whatever illness Itachi had, and that would probably be something along the lines of an autoimmune disease like HIV, or maybe just more of an inflammatory condition like microscopic polyangiitis, either of which forced him to take many different medications to prolong his life, as stated by Obito, meaning that upon planning his death, he probably stopped taking his medication, then allowed himself to die and put on a more convincing performance, which did work. So then, where am I getting at? What does this all mean? Well, as I'm sure some of you might know, Itachi is probably just much closer to his Edo Tensei counterpart than what we have been led on to believe, where most people would just conclude that Edo Itachi is way stronger because he doesn't have his illness, and that's simply not the case, or at least it would be very hard to prove this, as all you would really have is just, well, we have better feats compared to when he was alive, and when he was alive he was sick, so he probably just isn't sick when he's in Edo. However, this argument just kind of presupposes while alive he is always like his Sasuke fight self, which is clearly isn't true, as we've discussed, meaning that this argument kind of falls apart. Now, just for transparency, I would grant that Edo Itachi is a better fighter due to him not having any MS drawbacks and having implied to actually have infinite stamina, as implied by Kakuzu's 4th data book file. However, excluding this, Itachi whilst alive, closer to the beginning of Shippuden, is the exact same as Edo Itachi, and yes, Edo Itachi, would just have the illness as well, meaning that Itachi could certainly scale above characters like a full power Killer Bee and KCM1 Naruto, seeing as Itachi was more than able to, parry off KCM1 Naruto in the air while both were just talking despite Itachi not having the MS out. Then Itachi completely blitzed Killer Bee, reacting to his surprise attack, jumping 3 separate times back before Bee even moved at all, which is pretty consistent with how Itachi could parry off over 10 different attacks from Bee's right, 8-sword style, showing just how formidable Itachi really is when he's not so deathly sick. Then he gets much stronger after using the MS, then he could just blitz Nagato with the MS with the Susanoo hand and the Totsuka blade, the same Nagato who could actually blitz Naruto and Bee at the exact same time. So, to wrap this all back around to Obito, the main thing for all of his scaling in Orange Mask was simply just be how Minato saw the entire fight against Pain and concluded that Obito was the real threat and would be one greater than Pain. It wouldn't require Sage Mode, but would actually require Naruto to have full mastery over Kurama to even beat. Thinking of Orange Mask Obito in his head, then once we enter the War Arc, KCM2 Naruto is the form Kurama states is what Minato wanted for Naruto and is the mastered form, which is pretty consistent as Minato was able to best Yellow Mask Obito, and Kakashi compares Minato to KCM2 Naruto in the war. The same Minato who Obito could scale to on a low end when you consider he's able to keep pace and hold to it's like a holding back Minato, which I have many videos on that, concluding that Obito is heavily implied to be just under KCM2 by an unknown margin, whilst in Orange Mask. And then you have Itachi in a better state, scaling just a decent bit above KCM1. So you could actually conclude that Itachi's combat prowess probably just isn't insanely far from Obito's, as it, and it is probably pretty consistent from why Obito makes these statements. Now, if you disagree with Itachi scaling to his Edo Tensei counterpart, and you dislike Obito being just under KCM2, then by all means, this is fine. You're just left with Obito scaling above characters like Fu, Torne, and early MS Sasuke, which Itachi would obviously scale above as well, considering how Sasuke is only stated to ever surpass Itachi upon getting getting the EMS, and Itachi obviously just scales above Orochimaru, who can combat equally to Old Man Hiruzen, who would have been the strongest shinobi in Konoha, placing him above Fu and Torne as well. This means that, at their high ends of interpretation, you are left with Itachi being above KCM1 by a solid margin, and Obito being under KCM2 by an unknown margin, making their tiers of fighters very comparable. Then, if you don't accept this, you can just use their baseline assumption that you're left with, being that they're just, way above peak Jonin fighters and are just implied to be at the top echelon of the Akatsuki, and then you just default to their rivalry that we analyzed prior, and you can just go back to those conclusions. This all leads to one conclusion here, though, that many people simply don't reach due to lack of wanting to analyze the fine print here, or even just open their eyes, and it's that Itachi could have killed Obito in their Akatsuki days. And does this simply imply that he's stronger? Well, no, not necessarily. However, the same would be said about Obito, as there isn't a way to conclude Obito is superior from his remarks about Itachi, when there is for Itachi to be superior from these remarks. All in all, if they fought, from Obito's assessment, Itachi probably could have beaten him enough times for him to never test the theory, or maybe Itachi would have been able to, beat Obito more times than the antithesis. So, please, stop interpreting Obito's statements, about Itachi as, oh, Obito is way stronger, and there's no way Itachi could have beat him. Obito was just holding up his end of their deal, when that's just not the case. Why would he hold up this deal? It's because Itachi said he'd kill him if he didn't. Read the context, understand the context, analyze the statement, and then you will conclude that via some metric, Itachi is in the same caliber as Obito and would have killed him if they were to interact, and Itachi, were to know more of his abilities. This is exactly consistent with how Obito has implied that, his pact with Itachi was the one thing preventing him from achieving his life goal, and, what was the one promised outcome if he were to actually break this pact? Well, it was that Itachi threatened to kill Obito. So why would Obito be so scared if he doesn't think this is true? Well, maybe you could say that Itachi would have spread intel or killed other Akatsuki members, but that's kind of a leap. I do have videos on that if you'd like to check that out, but Itachi probably would have been able to kill Obito by some metric, and that's exactly what Obito implies. And for those, if you want to look more into how they might fight, since we can't conclude how Itachi would hold a win con, some might say that Obito would out-stamina Itachi whilst alive, but I would like to call this into question a bit, as yes, Obito is a stamina beast. Well, because Kamui is basically a 3 Tomoe Genjutsu ability, as the first time it's really noted from Madara. Madara implies that the rocks fell on him, and they fell in a way that it's almost like Obito slipped through them, despite Obito not awakening the MS until seeing Kakashi stab Rin. This is pretty consistent with his passive nature, and when you go back more to its 3 Tomoe scenes where he does use Kamui, you can see he's actually phasing through paper bombs in the Konan fight with the 3 Tomoe out, and if you zoom in on every single panel where the Sharingan can be shown in the Minato fight, it is the 3 Tomoe. So, the Kamui doesn't require much chakra, so yeah, he's a stamina beast, and Itachi, he was able to use a few MS abilities and fell forward, but let's also just consider how sick Itachi was at this moment. And Itachi's Susanoo, he literally held up until he had a heart attack and dropped dead. The Susanoo began to dissipate when his face fell flat on the concrete. So yeah, Itachi is also a stamina beast. And for those that, if you say, okay, well, the longer the fight goes on, this might be good for Itachi, that's true. And, is Itachi as smart as Minato? Because the way Minato beat Obito was he simply learned to test these timers. He came to a consistent speed. Obito believed in this speed and that this was Minato's top speed. Then he thought he could suck Minato in. Minato blitzed him and kind of won the battle of speed, as the Chapter 502 synopsis statement states. So could Itachi do this? Is he as smart as Minato? Well, probably. I mean, Itachi was a chunin when Minato was a graduation, whenever he graduated the academy. So, yeah, and yes, Minato did have perfect scores in the academy, but let me ask you, which is more impressive, right? Which is more impressive? Performing the skill in action or taking a literary exam on it? It's pretty clear. And no, this also isn't to dog on Pain and say that Itachi and Obito are way above Pain, because I don't want you to interpret that either, because Pain is actually, in a sense, a narrative rival to Itachi. But the point here is that Obito isn't massively above Pain or Itachi. as that's not what's implied. That's not at all what's implied. And as a matter of fact, he is actually probably very comparable to Itachi and Pain, as he implies about Itachi when he talks about him. But anyway, that's the video. Apologies for it being a little shorter. I do know you guys like these longer videos, but I figured this would be a solid topic to kind of just hammer home, because many people like to either just gloss over the entire matchup or just analyze it too much to where the conclusion misses the point entirely of what the statement actually implies. So yeah, figured this would be a good matchup to go to my Akatsuki playlist, which you guys are free to check out. Maybe if this is your first time hearing me, you really want to see if, you know, I'm worth subscribing to, I guess. Maybe you can check out that playlist. I have many other Akatsuki matches like Kisame versus Orochimaru, Itachi versus Pain, Sasori versus Deidara. I have one playing off this where Itachi actually goes on to fight every Akatsuki member in a gauntlet-like style if he were to betray the Akatsuki. And then I have one for Kisame as well if you were to be ordered by Obito to do that, and just more matches that you guys might like as well. So if you guys did enjoy, please maybe consider subscribing or liking the video. It would seriously be greatly appreciated. Again, apologies for the little bit of the shorter video, but I've just seen a little bit too much on this topic, too much misinformation spread, and can't let that slide. So yeah, as always, you know, hope you guys have a great day. God bless you guys. Love you guys.